From the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Diana Rossini,
I did not,
with ESPN, sent a tweet out earlier this morning, and it kind of put a little bit of a buzz out there because then the speculation around what this actually is going to look like. This was the tweet. She said, just texted with an NFL head coach about the upcoming cuts and what he expects. Quote, it's going to be a massacre next week all around the league. As teams,
in terms of cutting for free agency to make the cap, yeah. That's been expected. I guess, like, sometimes I don't think about that stuff. Like, stuff that I think about as expected, I expect everybody to know that it's expected, and I guess that wasn't the case.
Well, but it's sort of an expectation because of the cap crunch.
Right.
But then there's also the reality because you think, well, teams are going to try to find a way to massage things and keep good players. But when you say it's going to be a massacre next week around the league, then you start to project in your mind, like, well, what does that actually look like?
There are going to be teams that are going to be having to make more cuts than normal simply because they hadn't budgeted for a cap crunch this year. And so the teams that had the financial flexibility, there are about 4 or 5 of them. The Broncos are one of them. You look kind of smart in that regard. Now, if you're making good financial decisions, you're not winning football games. You can't be that smart, but you get the idea.
Right.
The Broncos. There were hot take radio guys that were outraged that the Broncos weren't spending money last year.
Oh, I remember.
It was the most laughable thing I've ever seen. Just outrage. The Broncos they don't have no desire to be competitive. Well, what are they going to spend money on? Somebody else's ash and trash that they didn't want, so just to spend money when you can roll it over in a cap crunch year and be a lot more flexible.
Right. It's the same people that hammered him for doing the Melvin Gordon deal. They're like, oh, what a terrible contract that was. And it's like, well, I mean, he did make your team better.
Right.
I mean, you maybe thought there was a better way to spend that money, and maybe you liked better running back options. Mm-hmm. But in the end, he did make you better. If you would have gone into the season with Philip Lindsay and Royce Freeman, you would have been worse as a rushing attack. Mm-hmm. That's just what it is. Like, Melvin Gordon made you better. So they did spend the money. Maybe you didn't love the contract, but it made you better.
They had about $20 million in available cap space, and they were outraged that they weren't spending that over the season.
Well, no, I know, but I'm saying that's even after that. I mean, like, imagine if they didn't even bring in Melvin Gordon.
Right. And I didn't care for the Melvin Gordon. I like Melvin Gordon the player. I didn't like Melvin Gordon the contract, but I think he lived up to it.
But you could afford it, and that's the point. Is like even in everything you just laid out, even in all of that, you could afford that contract. You could handle it. And he made you better. So in the end, I mean, what are we really I feel like we get lost in the weeds on these kind of arguments because it's like, well, what's the ultimate goal here? Like, everybody keeps moving the goalpost. Well, you want to win games. You want to be better on the field. Mm-hmm. Well, bring in players that make you better on the field. And sometimes it's going to cost money, and sometimes you're not going to really love the contract, but they are going to make you better. And sometimes you're going to do the same thing and you won't get the results you want, where you'll bring in the highest priced right tackle and you only get 60-some snaps out of them.
Yeah,
well, that didn't work out. But you know what? You took a swing to make your team better on the field, and sometimes it costs more.
With no fans in the stands for COVID, that's going to reduce league-wide revenue. They were smart enough to figure that out and say, you know what, let's not spend this money. We can roll this cap space forward and be better off for it next year. And they are. Now they're going to be in a position to be able to keep guys like Kareem, Justin, Vaughn, Shelby, if they want to. And so that's figuring that out is going to be the thing. Now, I know everybody's talked about this Deshaun Watson stuff, but at this point, the Texans aren't trading Watson, and I'm not sure, like, even though the Broncos are air quotes going to be in on him, I'm not sure that they're even going to be in the top 3 or 4 offers. I think it's time to go ahead and let that one go. But let's be real, because we're prepping for next year now.
Well, the thing about it for me, ultimately, and I guess you could find a way to make it work no matter what, but you're going to have to make decisions now without knowing what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson, because whatever's going to happen with him is going to be closer to the draft anyways. So you're going to be, if it's going to happen.
Right.
So this year.
Probably after the draft.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So the point is what you're going to do in free agency, the holes you have to fill on your team right now, and this is for all teams that would be interested in Deshaun Watson, you're going to have to make these decisions right now. You can only hold out so much to make that kind of drastic pivot from what your overall plan for the season is. Mm-hmm. You can only hold out so much.
Well, that's what I'm saying, Nick. You can't make decisions now hoping that Deshaun Watson is going to become available.
Exactly.
And not only hoping that he's going to become available, hoping that you have the top offer for him amongst a bunch of teams that are going to be competitive 4 of which draft in front of you.
Yep.
So by default, they have better picks. So I just don't think. I think it's time for people to finally let that one go, and move on from it. And let's be realistic. It's time to figure out. Okay, are we bringing Justin back? Are we bringing Vaughn back? Are we bringing him back long term? Are we bringing Shelby back? Kareem, what are we going to do with that situation? And go from there, and then look over the free agent market, see what's available out there. We still got to get a backup quarterback. There's still a few holes on the defense that we need. Another inside linebacker. If you don't pick up Vaughn, what edge rusher are you replacing him with on the free agent market for how much money? So there are plenty of things that the Broncos need to kind of keenly have their eye on. Sitting there on a pipe dream for Deshaun Watson is not one of them.
Back to the point about what Diana Rossini was saying about how we sort of expect to be a bit of a massacre next week. There is one thing that I'm definitely expecting, and I know that you're on the same page with this, is that we're going to see a lot of short-term deals coming up in this cycle.
Well, the players are going to try to do that because, you get a cap crunch. Like, okay, well, I'll do a short-term deal, and then I'll cash in again.
Yeah, a bunch of 1-year, 2-year deals kind of deal.
Guys trying to cash in,
But what do you think? I mean, what does that tell you that there are teams that are sort of expecting more or less that there's going to be a higher level of talent or maybe even some surprise names out there because they're in a cap crunch?
Potentially. Again, a lot of this hinges on the ABC deal and if they can get that done. But, you're going to have some of that. You're going to have teams doing that. It's going to depress the market. Guys aren't going to get the money they think they're going to get. And really, it's going to hurt the mid-tier free agents more than anything because the top guys are still going to get top money, right? The top guys are still going to get paid, but after that, after the wave one guys, then you got all these mid-tier guys, and they're going to be the ones that are doing the belt tightening. The Shelby Harrises of the world, those guys are going to be doing the belt tightening. Justin Simmons is still going to get paid either way. Guys like Shelby Harris aren't going to get what they think that they're going to get because you have this cap crunch, and it's just unfortunate.
Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, Zac Stevens from DNVR joins us. Get a little preview of what the Broncos are going to try to accomplish in free agency. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Johnny here with Zac Stevens from DNVR. Now we have, we're 2 weeks out, exactly 2 weeks out from the start of free agency. Well, a little less than that with the legal tampering period, which is always hysterical, but most of these deals get done way ahead of time. One of the things that we were reading earlier from Diana Rossini was an expectation that next week can be maybe a bit of a bloodletting for a lot of teams as they're in a bit of a cap crunch. It's kind of nice that the Broncos are in a little bit of a catbird seat here. Right before we brought you on, though, the focus seems for this team to be more on their own guys more so than outward, even though they do have some holes to fill.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Going into free agency, it seems like the Broncos initially from the numbers are going to be big players in free agency, have about the top 5 in cap space, have $45 million to spend. But, guys, they're going to have to look inward first. And really all that money could be spent just on their own players. Let's say they sign Justin Simmons up to roughly $15 million a year, sign Shelby Harris up roughly for $10 million a year. Okay, that's $25 million of your $45 million gone. You got to save roughly $10 million for the draft class. Okay, so there you go. You have $10 million. And by the way, you're going to be spending that $10 million on those 3 second-round tenders that we just talked about. Boom, there you go. There's no money to spend in free agency there. Now, if the Broncos want to become players in free agency and have some money to spend on outward guys to bring them in, of course, they can construct, and they will construct some of the contracts I just talked about where there's less cap hit this year. And that'll happen, but that'll only free up a little bit of money. But where the big money comes in is if they decide to move on from Von Miller or they get a significant pay cut from Von Miller. But let's say they move on from him, $18 million in salary cap space. Boom, right there. You are now a big player in free agency. You don't sign Justin Simmons, which is not going to happen. He's at least going to get that franchise tag. So not include him in this. But let's say you don't sign Shelby Harris. Boom. There's $10 million that you can go spend out on the open market. And then the other guy, which is just so interesting in this Justin Simmons conversation, is Kareem Jackson. Guys, Kareem Jackson has absolutely lived up to his 3-year, $33 million deal. But does George Paton want to spend over $25 million on Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson and have the highest paid safety room in the NFL when Kareem Jackson it isn't in the long-term plans for the Broncos? Does he want to do that? He could not turn down that option and free up $10 million. And guys, boom, right there. that's $10 million that they can spend on the open market. So you're absolutely right. If the Broncos want to focus on this team and keep everyone, then they're not going to be players at all. But if they make a few tough moves, then they can have some money to spend in the open market.
Yeah, I think there's obviously some options to restructure some guys. With Von Miller, you don't have to pick up the team option if you can talk him into taking a long-term restructure to a lower number. Kareem Jackson, you could extend him essentially and get him down to a lower number. So there are other opportunities for some flexibility. And then, you're probably going to see Nick Vannett and Jeff Driscoll gone as well. It's going to free up a little bit more money as well. So it's not like it's not like they can't make moves if they need to. There's all kinds of flexibility. The question is, what do you want to be this year and what do you want to be long term? I think you can keep a Kareem Jackson around to be competitive this year and still not have him in your long-term plans. I think that's a reasonable assessment. The question is, how are you going to do that fiscally?
Right, and that's kind of the same mindset that you have with Von Miller, right, is, okay, how long do we want to look at a restructure for Von Miller? Are we only looking at this 1 year trying to bring him down, or are we trying to do a 2-year J.J. Watt type of deal to keep him around? Or if George Paton says, no, I think Von Miller can be good enough for long enough where he can be on this team when we are competing. Because, guys, a 2-year contract for Von Miller, let's say it's this year, and next year it's the same deal that J.J. Watt got or a little more, because I think Von can get a little more than J.J. Watt. Certainly on the open market, he can get a lot more than J.J. just got. But let's say Paton looks at that deal. Well, if Von Miller is done in Denver after 2022, does it make sense to pay him a lot of money these next 2 years when you're just going to let him walk right when you can become competitive? Or does Paton say, what about a 4-year deal? So this year and 3 years on top of it, so we can potentially have Von Miller here for when this team is competing in 2 to 3 years. And now that would be the reason you would do it. That is to kind of knock those numbers down a little bit by giving him some more long-term capabilities there with the team.
Zach, what did you think about Justin Simmons' interview on SiriusXM? What were some takeaways? I thought one of the more interesting points he brought up is just how everybody has an expectation of what it would have been if John Elway was in charge here.
Yeah.
But now that it's George Paton, it throws a little bit of an interesting wrinkle in here.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Ryan. That was my biggest takeaway as well, was Justin saying, he kind of knew which way it was going when John was the guy, and now there's new management in charge, which changes things. And for the Broncos' perspective, for people that want Justin Simmons sticking around, it changes things in a very good way for Justin Simmons sticking around. Look, when Justin Simmons had his final press conference with the Broncos the day after the season ended, he was saying his goodbyes. In fact, he did a really great thing, and after the interview was over, or after the press conference was over, he said, thanks to the media for everything, and it really felt like a heartfelt goodbye from Justin. 2 hours later, guys, John Elway steps down as general manager and, of course, moves up into that role. Broncos get George Paton in here, and it seems like the tides have turned with Justin Simmons. We know that he's going to be here in 2021, and I really think that with George Paton here, the odds of him signing a long-term deal with this team, whether it's before the franchise tag deadline, after the franchise tag deadline, have significantly increased. It really seemed like Justin kind of knew his time was over in Denver under John Elway, or at least wasn't optimistic about it. And now with George Paton, George Paton really wants to draft and develop, keep their own players. And boy, if you're going to come in and let Justin Simmons walk, that goes against pretty much everything that we know about George Paton. So I don't expect that at all.
Hey, Zach, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for the time tonight, man. Appreciate you. Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, a dramatic change in philosophy from John Elway to George Paton. We'll go over the numbers from Jeff Legwold next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
The Broncos, under John Elway, have been predominantly a team that has thrived off of free agents. They've not really looked to maintain or sign back their guys. Jeff Legwold had this on ESPN, and it's pretty, it's kind of a shocking number to look at. From 2011 to 2017, Denver drafted 54 players who were eligible for second contracts and they only signed 6 of them to multi-year deals. 54 players from the range of 2011 to 2017, and only 6 of them were signed to multi-year contracts. And like I mentioned earlier, only 2 of them got the league top 3 at their position, Von Miller and Garrett Bowles. Virgil Green, Andy Janovich, Jeff Hireman were market value guys, and then of course there's Derek Wolfe in there. Mm-hmm. But that's it. Like that's really all the guys. And now there were some hits there in college free agents with Chris Harris and C.J. Anderson. So it's not like they haven't signed any of their guys back. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they have only survived on those free agent, sort of patchworking their roster together, and they've mostly let all of their other guys walk. So we're talking about a pretty stark transition in philosophy if George Paton is going to back up the words that he said about being a draft and develop kind of team, because that is the exact opposite. When I talk about 6 out of 54, that is the exact opposite of what it's been in Denver for the last decade.
Yeah, and, for whatever you think of John Elway was a businessman and understood how to run a business, and he wanted to win the negotiations and all that kind of stuff and show, keep the Denver Broncos a very profitable franchise and all those kinds of things. And they did get wins. When they had the quarterback, they were able to do that. The problem was that after the quarterback was gone, they weren't able to do that anymore. And it was the same. It's the same philosophy that Bill Belichick had in New England. That's what it was. This is the same philosophy that Elway, like everybody wants to talk about Elway, but that was the philosophy Elway had. And now he's shifting to a different philosophy. George Paton is of the draft and develop mindset. Same thing you've seen with the Green Bay Packers for years. Not really active in free agency. You bring your own guys in. You might bring a free agent in here and there, but really you're not that active in it. You want to just keep drafting and developing.
But when I look at this and I think about what George Paton is going to try to do here, it seems like he's going to need some time. Like he's going to really look at what his focus is for this organization and the direction he wants to take things. This isn't a 1 year, we're going to know what George Paton is trying to do here. This is a few years. This is a multi-contract kind of situation where we're going to really get a sense. Because, again, like I said, we're going from what was we're going to draft guys, we hope they pan out, we're going to swing for the fences on some players. Remember, that for a long time, that was the way they do it. They just drafted all athletes, and it didn't matter what they had upstairs.
Right.
They've shifted that to, well, we want some captains in there, and even if they aren't the most elite athletes, we can deal with that, Josie Jewell, because they're good locker room guys.
And they're good football players.
And they're good football players, sound football players. But what George Paton is going to try to do here is he's going to try to build a roster and a future with this team that's based on keeping your guys in-house as much as you can and building off of the successes you've had in the draft. Well, that takes time. That's not a year-to-year proposition. Didn't it feel like sometimes with John Elway that this roster was a year-to-year proposition? Like whatever he sort of felt like coming into the next year, and whatever he thought was the best way to compete, like whatever we did last year, okay, that didn't work. We're going to zag now. We're going to go this direction, and we're going to throw all of our resources this direction, and this is going to be the thing that wins.
It wasn't just the roster, too. It was the coaching staffs.
Exactly.
But it was that way. That was the thing.
Right.
And there wasn't continuity, and there wasn't a chance for guys to, Wade Phillips was here for a couple of years, so you got to grow in that, and you had a little bit of that, but it really didn't. I mean, you had a year or two, and that was it.
But in that process, you're drafting players to fit a scheme that the coaching staff that's going to be here in 2 years isn't going to matter to them.
Right, and that's where you get DeMarcus Walker moved from end to linebacker back to end.
Yes.
And you get kind of jerked around for a lot of his career. And so that's part of it. And, although in fairness, the Wade Phillips to Vance Joseph scheme is pretty much the same. I mean, it's mostly the same.
But what they might view as the kind of players they want on their team might be a little bit different too.
Right. So yeah, and that's the thing. You do need some continuity, and that's the other thing. If Vic Fangio doesn't win this year, you might be talking about another coaching change, another scheme change, another overhaul. Mm-hmm. Going from there.
I still don't like people keep projecting that about how he's a new GM and he's going to want his own coaching staff and all that. I think people really are downplaying the impact of coming to work with Vic Fangio. I mean, these guys have been working really, really closely over the last few weeks, ever since he got here. Mm-hmm. And he was, of course, part of the crew that hired him. Mm-hmm. And he spoke so glowingly. Now, of course, he's going to speak glowingly about him in his intro press conference. But they're just the way he said it kind of resonated with me, that everybody keeps saying, oh, well, he's going to move on from Vic Fangio after this year. And I was like, well, maybe he came in here thinking, I'm excited to work with a guy that gave us fits in Minnesota with his
defense now.
Yes.
Like Kyle Shanahan's offense is the Vogue offense in the NFL. Vic Fangio's defense is the one everybody's copying. Like more and more teams are switching to his defense.
Yes.
So, and that's, guys are getting hired off the Fangio tree. Brandon Staley got hired off the Fangio tree.
That's what I'm saying. Give him some time to grow into the head coaching role, but recognize that you have a brilliant defensive mind here. Mm-hmm. And if he can grow into the head coaching role, give him some time, give him a good quarterback, maybe something can happen there.
Just got to figure the offense out.
Have to figure the offense out. Also, got to have a better turnaround than 6 different quarterbacks in your first 2 years.
Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight. Tune in to Broncos TV every weeknight at 6:30, right here on KTVD Channel 20.